What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Saturday Standouts. My name is Caleb at CHS No on Twitter, right there at the bottom. With me, as always, is my co-host Sam Daring. You can follow him at Twitter at Sam_Daring68. And you can follow us Saturday Standouts at SAT Standouts, capital U, capital S, capital N on Twitter as well. This is where our show goes live. One of the streams that our show goes live. We also go live on YouTube and the Unwrapped channel as well. So you guys can follow the Unwrapped Sports Network, who we are blessed to be able to call, our home and everything like that. But before we get going, Sam, tonight we're going to be going over the defensive line prospects for the upcoming 2021 NFL draft, which is exciting. Defensive line is pretty stacked, whether that's the interior defensive line or on the outsides at the edge positions as well, which we will most likely get to next week. But Sam, how are you doing tonight, my man?
I'm doing well. Had to work, hit the gym. We go to hit Chick-fil-A every Wednesday, so it's nice. I think I mentioned that last week, but it's awesome, man. But yeah, I mean, I've been watching Quinn Meinerz all week on Twitter. This dude's just blowing up the combine. I remember talking to you yesterday. Dude, he ran like a 4.96 unofficial 40. I don't remember the number of his vertical, but I mean, the last like top one was Tristan Wirfs, and I mean, you know how he panned out in the NFL. So, I mean,
yes, I do.
That's like, this dude is unreal. Like I love watching these D3 guys, and like Ali Marpet at Hobart, even drafted coming out of training camp. He was a projected starter. So this D3, like, yes, it's awesome because he's from Wisconsin, but I love hearing these D3 stories.
Yeah, and if you guys don't know who Meinert is, he was one of the guys that was really showing out, at the Senior Bowl and really kind of made a name for himself. Sam mentioned to me yesterday, we were talking about him, that there's a rumor out there that all 32 teams were there to see him participate in his pro day, and he absolutely killed it based off of his results. But yeah, before we go ahead and jump into our defensive line prospects, more importantly, the interior of the defensive line, we're going to go over some sponsors. So if you guys are gambling people like myself, head over to mybookie.ag and use code USN100 for double your first deposit, guys. I love gambling. March Madness is coming up. It's the best time of the year to gamble. So head over there, get double your first deposit. It's a minimum of $45, I think a max of $1,000. So you put in $100, you get a free $100 from my bookie to play. It's amazing stuff. Also head over to rxhemp.com. Use code RXHemp-USN for 10% off every single purchase. And what RX hemp is, guys, is it's all natural pain relief cream that is CBD infused, so no THC from the marijuana plant, just the CBD from it. So it's great cooling and or warm and cool system that they got going on. It's great stuff. Also, throughout the show, you're going to be seeing, I might throw around our Patreon, so keep an eye out for that as well as our shop at teespring.com. So you can head to teespring.com/stores/unwrapped and get all of your Unwrapped shows merchandise, and then get your other merchandise there as well, just your Unwrapped, not generic, but quite the variety of styles we got going. We got a drip design, we got a Hollywood design, we got a thank you for shopping with us design. It's great stuff we got going over there at Unwrapped, a sitcom design as well. And then I'm going to bring up the Patreon later once everybody's fully invested to this show. But without further ado, Sam, I'll let you take it away with our first guy and, kind of introduce us to what we're going to be going over tonight.
Yes, I mean, Caleb, you mentioned we're going to be talking about the defensive line prospects. Just finished up our mock draft, and, in case you guys missed that, that was published yesterday. Some very interesting one. It was an interesting one. I want to get the trades pretty quick here, but lots of big QB moves, so definitely go check that out. And yeah, so let's dive into it. And the first one is arguably probably the best defensive lineman in this draft is Christian Barmore. And he had a really strong start, and then middle of the season, he was kind of up and down, and he really turned it on late in the season. Ended with 27 total tackles. I believe it was 6 sacks. He's 6'5", 310. I mean, this dude is a run stuffer, and I mean, he really turned it on. He went from being the solidified first-round pick, or I guess first-round pick coming into the season, kind of up and down, kind of falling out of the first round. And I really think late in the season, even in the national title game against Ohio State, I think he really solidified himself as a first-round pick.
Yeah, definitely did. This past year, he kind of had struggles with his effectiveness from game to game. He would have some moments that were just like, you're just kind of disappeared on us in certain games. But when you notice that, it wasn't necessarily the bigger games. So it was like when his name was called, or when the occasion arose for him to rise to the occasion, he did that. He was very effective in the big games and showed up when he needed to. He has earned incredible pass rushing grades his past 2 seasons, with an 88.1 in 2019 and a 91.5 in 2020, which are great, grades for a pass rusher on the interior of the defensive line. Got great size, burst, length, and flexibility to, beat his opposing offensive lineman off the block. He wins those battles on a regular basis, and that's something you can see with Christian Barmore. Probably going to be the number one overall defensive lineman that we see off the board. So that's going to be cool to determine where he's going. But you imagine him around in maybe middle, late first round.
Yeah, I would say I would even say in the 20s, somewhere in the 20 range. I want to say I saw him earlier this week at 16 to the Cardinals. But I mean, I think he's a solidified first round pick. Where I don't think he's going top 15, maybe I don't think he's going top 10, obviously, but maybe top 15. I think he's going to fluctuate throughout the first round because, like I've mentioned multiple times, like once you get past 10, 11 through 20 is so like it's going to be so interesting.
Yeah, it will be. I think there's some teams that will be able to get a nice little steal there. And not necessarily that he's a steal because he is that good, but this defensive line class isn't necessarily the defensive line classes of the past that we have seen, that you really got to go out and get these guys like a Leonard Williams or somebody of that nature. So that's what we're looking forward to here is, these guys are more of, your average defensive lineman. They're not necessarily the bread makers of the defensive line on an NFL team. So Christian Barmore has the potential to be that. I don't know if he is that. I think he'll probably fit best next to somebody else that might be able to open up some holes for him. He's very dominant. When he faced above average offensive linemen in the games, he did really well. The two best interior lines that he faced all season, he came up with 12 pressures in those games, especially when it came to the playoff games. He had a hell of a day in both of those playoff games that we were able to see Alabama and them ultimately winning that national championship. So I like Christian Barmore a lot. I don't want to say he's a steal because he's not really, but that's just because of this interior defensive line class isn't necessarily as deep or star-studded as we have had in the past. And with that, we'll move on to our next guy, who is going to be a defensive lineman out of NC State in the name of Aleem McNeil. He's more of a nose tackle guy, so he can also, he kind of takes up 2 blocks per game, but he is pretty effective in the pass rushing game, which is kind of rare for a guy that takes on that amount of blocks every single snap.
Yeah, I didn't even know until earlier tonight that in high school, he was a running back and a linebacker. So, I mean, he showed off that versatility, coming into NC State. And like you mentioned, like he's more of an interior nose tackle guy. I've seen like in different various opinions on him as a pass rusher. A lot of people praise him. A lot of people, how's it going, Connie? Good to see you. By the way, before I make my point here, Connie and Josh earlier this week interviewed Trey Wingo. Awesome interview. Awesome job, both of you. Definitely go check that out. But yeah, I mean, Aleem McNeil, I mean, I wanted to talk about him because he seems to be a riser. And I saw him in a mock draft, I want to say there yesterday. I think it was last night, and he was drafted to the Packers in the 2nd or 3rd round. So I think his versatility, and I would definitely also say that his pass rushing is an area where he does excel in a little bit more as a run blocker. He's 6'2", 315, and he does scream consistency. So I mean, he stepped on NC State and made that immediate impact and continued to shine.
Yeah, and he's not necessarily, a playmaker on the defensive side of the ball. He's more of a, a disruptor, if you will. He's kind of a guy that swallows in those offensive blocks so that other guys can get in there and make the play for the defense. So he plops down very well. He's, he doesn't move. Once he's there in his spot and he's locked down and locked in, and he doesn't move at all, which is really what you want He led all Power 5 defensive tackles in run defense grade with a 92.1, and he's a big boy at 340. So you can understand the level that this guy is playing at. Anthony coming in here and saying he appreciates you for that shout out, Sam. It's awesome stuff. That Trey Wingo show with Gen Z Sports, awesome. If you guys haven't checked that out, definitely go and check it out. A lot of information. They were only supposed to have Trey for about 15 minutes, and they ended up getting him for an hour and a half. So it was amazing stuff over there with Gen Z Sports with Josh and Connie. But yeah, back to McNeil. He's just a guy who fills the hole. And, you know, for a defense who runs just nose tackle as a whole, you can't ask much more for that, because then that takes away a block that, you know, when you can run a blitz heavy scheme and a 3-4 or whatever you want to run in a nickel in that package as well. I think that is very beneficial. I can see him being very successful in the NFL just based off of what he's able to do on the interior of the defensive line there.
Yeah, and I'm interested to see where these defensive line process, especially like McNeil, because, you know, I feel like a lot of teams are going to value defensive linemen a lot higher than we had expected. And I went into the Packers knowing that cornerback and D-line should be our first priority. And, you know, I mean, now I'm okay with waiting for a defensive lineman, because I think they need to go back and watch the Super Bowl and realize how much the linebacker position really matters. But that's beside the point. But yeah.
Yeah. It wouldn't be a bad pick. You know, Packers definitely need help on just stopping the run as a whole. It's, you know, one of their weaknesses. I think the tape that McNeil's been able to put on is definitely beneficial to him moving forward. His pass rush grades are around 80.8 and 77.5 over his past 2 seasons. So they're pretty average right there. And, you know, the younger you are as well, you know, you're a little bit more raw as a player, and you have to kind of grow into your body and learn the knowledge that it takes to be able to be a successful nose tackle. And I think he excels at that very well. And I think he's going to make a formidable NFL player. But with that being said, we'll move on to another player who, you know, he's probably better off as a defensive tackle playing next to another defensive tackle. But he was put in positions in his college career where he did have to play nose, and he wasn't as successful. And that's my guy from down here in Passy, Florida State, and Marvin Wilson.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many shocking players that unfortunately dropped. And I think
right.
Marvin,
so let's talk about that for a minute. Why do you think Marvin dropped the way he did? Do you think it's based off of the situations that he was placed in terms of scheme and position, and having to change from what, you know, Jimbo was initially there running to what, you know, Willie Taggart eventually came in and ran?
Yeah, I think that very well could have been a factor, because I don't think there's a certain scheme that didn't fit for him. Because if you look at, like you just mentioned, Willie Taggart, he flourished. He flourished very, very well. And he had like 1 or 2 good games this year under Jimbo Fisher. One of that being when they upset North Carolina, beginning to midway through the season.
I think he swapped the coaches, but yeah.
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah.
But Jimbo was when he was first here in his freshman year, and then Willie kind of took over.
Yeah. And I mean, he was hurt, and so like I know it was because it was him and Tamori and Terry, you know, that were dismissed from the team right away. And Marvin Wilson was already hurt, so at that point he opted out, and I think he has the tape that is good enough to be drafted. He did not look good in the Senior Bowl at all, so I think that was one guy that we were, you know, keeping our eyes on in the Senior Bowl, and he just did not perform well at all. And if I'm not mistaken, I don't think Florida State has had their pro day yet, correct?
Correct, we have not.
Right. So, I mean, I think Florida State's going to be an interesting team for guys like Marvin Wilson and Tamori Terry. I've got cousins that are extremely high on Tamori Terry in terms of dynasty as well. But I think Tamori Terry, I don't think we got to him in the receivers, but I think Marvin Wilson, if he's developed the right way, I think he could be a very, very productive defensive lineman. I don't think he's capable, you know, of being that day one starter right away. But from the point you said about Barmore being kind of a rotational guy, that's what I see, a kind of like a guy like Marvin Wilson. You put Marvin Wilson next to Kenny Clark, or being a rotational guy against Kenny Clark, who has really, really, really shown out. One of the last picks under Ted Thompson was Kenny Clark, lived up to that, or earned that extension. You put Marvin Wilson next to a guy to learn behind Kenny Clark, who is developing into, perhaps a top 5 defensive tackle in football right now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think he fits best next to another formidable defensive tackle, or be a rotation guy coming off the bench in times of need. I mean, if you look at some past Florida State defensive linemen that have done that and been successful, you look over at the Chiefs, who won a Super Bowl with Derek Nandi being that rotational player on the defensive line. And I think that is going to be a good fit for somebody like Marvin Wilson in this situation. His first 3 years when he was with Willie Taggart and Jimbo Fisher, he excelled. He had great, overall grades, 90 plus, 90.9 pass rushing grade. But when Mike Norvell got there, situations changed. They started playing a different defense in his last season was with Mike Norvell and Fuller as his defensive coordinator. So they moved, more down to a 3-man front instead of a 4-man front. And so his, grades dropped off significantly. And yes, you're right. He did deal with injuries this past season. So that's kind of why, he kind of was like, at this point, like, it's not even, not only worth my time, but it's probably not even beneficial for the team when they're trying to break in a new head coach, break in new players, a new culture, and things of that nature. It's probably just better off for me to leave. It just kind of goes to show the type of man that Marvin Wilson is. So, like, I look more at his personality traits more so than his play. Because his senior year obviously gives pause to a lot of NFL scouts out there, a lot of coaches as well. But then you look at his personality. I mean, he is the one who brought up the whole thing about, when all the Black Lives Matter stuff was going on and the racial injustices and things of that nature. He's the one that kind of brought it to Mike Norvell's attention when Mike Norvell put out a comment, and he probably didn't go about it the right way in putting it on Twitter first, but, eventually him and Mike Norvell had a sit-down conversation man-to-man, and we're able to hash things out, and Mike Norvell was supportive in everything that Marvin has done. He's created a fundraising event that helps elementary schools around the Tallahassee area, and he's doing that in college. And it's all nonprofit, of course, because you're not getting paid in college to be able to do things like that. But it just goes to show the type of person that Marvin is. And I just wanted to highlight that a little bit, just because I know a little bit more about him. He's a true leader on the football field. Guys rally around him. They respect him. And I think he'll be a nice fit. I think he'll probably be around maybe a late day 2, early day 3 type guy. What are your thoughts on his draft position?
I mean, I think if he would, I think the pro day is going to be something to really, really watch. I'm going to give him an early day 3 grade, somewhere around the 4th to 5th round range, because I mean, if he falls past the 5th round, I would be a little bit surprised, just because, yes, you do see a lot of NFL teams use that recency bias with a lot of the teams, with a lot of these players. For example, I think Najee Harris is probably going to get drafted before Travis Etienne. Najee Harris came off 2 straight, I want to say it was 1,200 yards rushing seasons the past 2 seasons. Travis Etienne had a little bit of a down year. His draft stock went down, but back to your point, he does have the tape. He does have elite tape to show. It's not like his stats just don't wow you. He went into the season being that top 10 prospect. And right. Yes, I do think the coaching change did play a little bit of a factor. It very well could have. He was already hurt, and I'm really, really glad you brought up his character, and because you'd be very, very surprised how much character does affect draft stock. Not in like this drastic way, but there's several teams that don't want players with past history in their college career. And we're going to get to Loudermilk in a bit here, but I'm glad you brought that up because that'll flow very nicely if we go to Loudermilk next.
Yeah, let's go ahead and jump into Loudermilk. Then I'll let you take it away since that's your boy.
Yeah, I mean, this dude is 6'7", 293 from Howard, Kansas. He's a Kansas native, just like Graham Mertz. I was able to interview him last week. This dude is such an unbelievable person. And I asked him, he's a run stuffer. Like I said, he's a mountain of a man. His stats don't really wow you. I mean, he came off with 13 total tackles, and two sacks in a shortened season because going into the Northwestern game they hadn't practiced in 2 weeks, and he was telling us that he couldn't do anything. Like he couldn't even hit the weight room. Like he was sitting in his apartment or like off campus or wherever he was living. And I asked him, we asked him, one area that he wants to work on, and he said playing under Jim Leonard gave him the ability to, show off his run skills his skills in the run game. You don't see that too often in the passing game, and I think that was an area where that he immediately said that he wants to build on in the NFL. And I'm glad you brought up the character, because this is one thing that really stuck out to me is we ended on about 10 to 20 years from now was our question. What do you want people in the NFL to remember you for? And he says, I want people to speak more on who I am as a person, more than who I am as a football player. And we've seen the history of Wisconsin players come through Wisconsin. Jack Cohn, wish nothing but the best for him over at Notre Dame. Ian Book's gone. He's now going into a starting role. Jack Cohn was an easy guy to root for. We've never had, Badger players that have had off-field issues, and have had. We've always seen Wisconsin Badgers athletes, possess that charisma. And Isaiah Loudermilk was such an unbelievable human being. He's such an awesome guy to talk to, and I wish him nothing but the best. But yeah, the fact that you brought up Marvin Wilson and his charisma off the field, his support for the Black Lives Matter movements, and what he's been doing off the field, even through his injuries, is just amazing. It's awesome.
Yeah, character speaks loudly, especially when it comes to having a leadership capability on a team, no matter where you're at. So we applaud all those guys who are being able to put in that effort to not only be great football players, but be even better people off of the field. So, applauding them for that. And I see Loudermilk, he's listed as a DN. Like when he played at Wisconsin, he played inside and outside. They would move him inside, they would move him outside as well, because he's a very versatile type of player, which a lot of teams might, fall in love with a little bit. He didn't necessarily stuff the stat sheet or anything like that, and why you don't really see him high up on draft boards or anything of that nature when it comes to, your top ranked interior defensive line prospects. But guy gets it. He knows how to go about his game the right way. He played in 40 games total, 26 starts, which is awesome. You started over half of your games while in college. Career total of 63 tackles, 11.5 for loss, 7.5 sacks, 9 pass breakups, and 2 forced fumbles. 3-year starter, was elected third team All Big Ten selection in 2020. He was only a 3-star recruit, but he had scholarship offers from big schools. And so he's definitely a guy you want on your team. Another rotational guy, a guy you can bring in, like I mentioned earlier, Derek Nandi. Derek Nandi wasn't drafted very high. He was drafted very late, but he's been a productive rotational guy for the Kansas City Chiefs on their defensive line when his name's called. And that's kind of what I see here with Loudermilk, is he's going to be one of those guys that not necessarily a huge name that people are going to remember, but he's going to be very serviceable in the NFL for what he is able to provide, not only as a football player, but, as a character guy in that locker room, because you need that moving forward in the NFL, because the tighter you are as a team, the more successful you're most likely going to be, no matter what level you're at.
Right. And, Wisconsin doesn't breed defensive linemen. They breed the other side of the ball. They breed their O-line U. And you don't see many, defensive line, interior D-line prospects come out of Wisconsin and really flourish. And, there's so many Wisconsin players, and I'm sure you can attest with a lot of these Florida State guys. They're very easy guys to root for. And yes, this might be a biased comment, but Badger football is it's so awesome to watch. And we talked about Graham Mertz after the Illinois game, and I brought him up too in our interview. And when he committed to Wisconsin, I don't recall the other offers he had, but he didn't want to pick the obvious spot. He wanted to pick the spot that, the best quarterback that's ever come out of Wisconsin is Russell Wilson. And Russell Wilson didn't even start at Wisconsin. He didn't even start his college career at Wisconsin. He's playing for the Colorado Rockies. And then we get Joel Stave, Bart Houston. I mean, like those guys were fun to watch. Tanner McAvoy, even Jack Cohn. And Jack Cohn to me looked a lot more confident last year than he did 2 seasons ago. And yeah, I mean, we discussed Graham Mertz very briefly, and yeah, it was a great interview. But yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, we both kind of mentioned here, character plays a huge factor, and especially now that I don't know the status of the draft, if it's going to be in person, my guess is it's going to be virtual. I think they should do virtual again. I thought they did very well doing it virtually. I enjoyed it, but virtual interviews with teams, it's to me, I definitely feel like, and we've probably had this conversation before, it's very hard to know, like talking to someone virtually could be a completely different person than talking to them in person. So
Yeah.
like a first impression absolutely always matters, but it's very crucial, in my opinion, to make that first impression during those interviews. And like you said, I mean, all 32 teams were at Quinn Miners' interview or pro day yesterday over at Whitewater Perkins Field. I want to say there were 4 offensive line coaches. None of them were the Packers, but I think one of them was the Steelers, the only team I remember. But yeah.
Yeah, it's different to see, and hear people talk about defensive linemen, out of Wisconsin. We're usually talk about the other side of the ball, like you mentioned. But it's cool to be able to talk about a guy like this, a guy that's not necessarily one of the big names. People might not know a lot about him. And I love the fact that you're like, the mutual respect we have for each other's teams, even though, we're from different areas of the country and, they're 2 different styles of football. And it's just like, I have learned so much more about, Wisconsin than I have ever known about Wisconsin from just being your co-host. And I'm sure you've learned the same thing about Florida State. And, they're each exciting in their own way. It's cool to see, the hog mollies up there in Wisconsin be able to pave freaking highways for running backs to run through. I think that's so cool how they're just able to move defensive linemen out of the way and things of that nature. And then, of course, when you move down to a place like in the ACC or in like Florida State, for instance, it's all flash and style and things of that nature. And you got to make the exciting playmaker plays and things of that nature. So, yeah, it's really cool, man. But we'll move on here, and we're going to jump into one of my favorite guys who I have just been high on since, we've even started this whole show and podcast and everything. And that's one of the defensive linemen out of Washington, and Levy Owuzurike. Didn't butcher the name now because I've said it so many times, but I'll let you take it from there, and then I'll get into him a little bit later.
See, you said you were high on him before we started this. I thought for sure you were going to say Jay Tafel. but yeah, I mean, Levi Owuzurike played next to Vita Vea at a point in his career at Washington. And as soon as Vita Vea left for the NFL, your Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Levi Owuzurike had some big shoes to fill. And he certainly filled those very well. And a little bit of a surprising guy that he did opt out. And we'll get to Jay Tafel in a bit here. There's another guy that opted out. But, you're still seeing Levi in first-round mock drafts. And I got a feeling if a guy like Levi or even Jay Tafel are, still on the board late in the first round, early in the second, you might see a team reach for them because they might not be available at their next pick. And to me, what really stands out to Levi to me is the fact that he's been consistent. His ability to handle the workload after the departure of Vita Vea to the NFL. So I'm very excited to see what he can do at the next level.
Yeah, and I guess that's kind of, well, he obviously opted out this past season along with another defensive lineman for Washington, I believe. So we didn't get to see his tape for the 2020 season, but he already had the tape and the film to send out because he was just a monster. And, the 1 year where he was, a full-time starter, he didn't necessarily put up the grades or the numbers that he did the previous year when he was, a part-time guy coming in, played 391 snaps. So good overall, but his, go-to move is obviously his explosiveness. As soon as the ball even, just slightly moves, he is, on it like immediately. And that also, that's awesome and great, but it's also one of his, the worries that come about when you talk to NFL scouts or things of that nature, or when you see NFL scouts talk, is that what else can you do besides explosiveness and use your explosiveness to your advantage? We need to see a couple more tools added to your bag for you to become that next level in the NFL on no matter what team you're talking about. And I think I put him at number 32 overall to the Bucks in our last mock
You
draft
did.
actually. Because Ndamukong Suh's not getting any younger, starting to slow down a little
He's a
bit later
free
in his
agent
career.
too.
Free agent too. And so you look at pairing him with Vita Vea, which is when
That'd be fun. Yeah.
when Enrique had his best year ever was when he was coming and playing next to Vita Vea. That's when he had his best grades out in pass rushing and things of that nature. So that would be a huge win for the Bucks, in my opinion. But we'll see where he lands, because he could probably be, a 1 through 3 day guy too. You don't necessarily know where he's going to end up just based off of not seeing him play this last year. But in the worries that I already said, he needs to figure out how to recover. So once he's knocked off of a block, how to recover and get back into the play rather than just standing around and trying to bully your way in there. You got to be able to use different techniques to get back there. So like when it comes to NFL offensive linemen, they're obviously way more quick with their feet, more choppy. They're much more athletic, know how to use their hands well. So that can be a cause for concern when it comes to how effective he'll be in the NFL. But where do you see, Luis Enrique, fitting in terms of the draft?
I would definitely. Are you asking what round?
Yeah. What round, or like,
I mean,
what do you like about him and where you think he would fit? Or
I mean, if he goes in the first round, the Buccaneers would be a lot of fun. But I personally think he's talented enough to go in the first 2 rounds. Is he a solidified first round pick? Maybe not. Maybe a guy like Christian Barmore might be more of that guy. I think if we would have seen him and JTFL play, I think we might even see 2, maybe 3 defensive linemen, depending on how their productions would have been playing this season. But you mentioned his technique, the area that he does need to polish up a bit. But his athleticism, his twitch, and his explosiveness, I think teams are going to fall in love with that, and that would be a lot of fun. Watching him and Vita Vea, reuniting. Vita Vea, that's a guy that the Packers, interviewed before that draft. I don't recall who they drafted. That might have been the draft where they traded down. I can't remember, but that's a guy that I really wanted on the Packers. Pair him next to Kenny Clark. I think our run defense would be a whole lot better than it is right now. And I know it might not even be as big of a concern that it is right now. But, and Ndamukong Suh's a free agent. They tagged Chris Godwin. They say re-sign Levante David. I would assume Shaq Barrett is probably gone now, especially since they already used their franchise tag. My guess is Rojo's gone. I think if they're smart, they try to bring Leonard Fournette back. AB's up. So I mean, the Buccaneers, like the Packers as well, because they're also shopping Preston Smith. I think the Buccaneers are going to be an interesting team to watch in the offseason to see which guys they bring back.
Yeah, it will be. It'll be interesting to see who they're trying to add and what type of pieces they're trying to add. But we'll keep it moving here. And the guy that you originally thought I was going to talk about, and that's the guy from USC, Jay Tuafili, big boy, 6'3", 315, redshirt junior. Obviously went to USC, played defensive tackle. Overall, just a hell of a hard worker. Honestly, he was pretty much deemed the best player in the Pac-12. He decided to opt out this past season for COVID concerns, is what everybody, like we were talking about, was with Enrique. Same thing here with Tuafili. But I'll let you take it from there and just dive into whatever you want to about him, because he is indeed probably one of the best players in the Pac-12.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what I was going to kind of allude to. This is a guy, even though he did opt out, if he goes in the first round, it's not going to surprise me at all. Yes, we don't know how rusty he is, but these guys aren't just opting out and not doing anything. Yes, they're not playing a snap of football, but they're still prepping. And obviously, yes, sitting out from a year of football is going to be tough for a guy. It might be a little bit tough for a guy to come out of, but Jay Tafel, dude, he's 6'3", 305. And he, like 2019, I want to say, yeah, right before he opted out, he had 42 total tackles and 4.5 sacks. And this USC team is a team that we have praised. And when we were doing our Pac-12 predictions, it didn't help at all that, Jay Tafel opted out because there's not a whole lot of playmakers. Like Talanoa Hufanga, a guy that I love a lot, like him and Thibodeau are my two favorite guys in the Pac-12. And I think Hufanga is going to be a draft riser. I think whoever gets him is going to be a steal. But anyways, we'll get to him in the secondary one. But there weren't a lot of playmakers outside of Hufanga in that USC defense this season. And USC, I feel like comes in with a lot of hype, and especially this season, coming in with so much hype. And their first 2-3 games of the season, they're in close games, and they almost lose these games that probably shouldn't be close. Probably shouldn't even be losing these games. One of them might have went to overtime if I'm not mistaken, but. But yeah, I mean, I think this is a guy, like I said, if he goes in the first round, it's not going to surprise me at all. I would select Jay Tafel at 29. I'd go other ways, but I mean, even multiple people have expressed their concern, non-Packer fans, that the run defense is the problem. If they decide to go with a D line outside of a guy like Greg Newsome, which we'll definitely get to, and Eric Stokes, because this is a deep secondary class where they potentially could wait, I would love Jay Tafel at 29 to Green Bay.
Yeah, and he's slipping in a lot of mocks. People have got him down to maybe even like the 3rd round. So if I'm seeing that, and I'm just like, that's a gold mine sitting there in the 3rd round right there. Yeah. He is insanely athletic, insanely fast, insanely explosive. Knows what to do. What's up, Michael?
How's it going, Michael?
We appreciate you coming in here, brother. He is just, his agility, his just athleticism is, for a guy who is 315 pounds, he shouldn't move the way that he does. He's strong both against the run and the pass. So, I mean, if you could get him, an NFL team can get him, good Lord, man, like, how are you letting that guy slide to that point is my first thing. But then you come into some potential concerns for him. He's going to need to develop, like I mentioned earlier, a better tool bag or a better toolbox of moves. When we were talking about Luis Enrique, because he's just more of an explosive guy. So he's going to have to learn how to use his hands a little bit more, learn how to shed blocks, get off of those when he needs to be. He's more of a 3 technique guy. So we'll see what he's able to do with that in the NFL. But that's what the NFL is for. It's every time you move to the next level, you get taught better and new ways to go about thinking of making these moves. So if he's able to develop, a team is able to develop him, watch out, because this guy could be a terror on the defensive line sooner rather than later, as soon as he gets it. And we'll move over to a guy out of the SEC, and that's going to be Tyler Shelvin. Didn't really pay much attention to the defensive line at LSU. But he's kind of a majority plug and play run defender, if I'm not mistaken. If that's some of what I'm seeing, is he's more of a run type of defensive lineman. But what are you seeing on Telvin there, Sam?
You're talking about Tyler Shelvin, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, this dude is. I'll answer this question first. We did not talk about it. I don't recall who we had him taken. I think we might have had Rashawn Slater last week. Did we have him, Caleb? Was that what we had?
I'd have to look. I'll bring it up real quick if you want to go ahead and keep talking about Telvin.
Yeah, sure. 6'3", 362 pounds. He moves very well for his size. I'm not sure if you mentioned that at all, but he's very active with his hands. He has a very, very high motor. I would love to see him play next to a guy like Kenny Clark. Again, Kenny Clark. There was one of my friends has his podcast.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, Sam, but yeah, we indeed had the Cowboys taking Rashawn Slater, offensive tackle out of Northwestern, last week in our latest mock. There for you, Michael.
Yeah, Rashawn Slater. I feel like a lot of people were seeing Pat Surtain, but yeah, but like I said, Tyler Shelvin, 6'3", 362 pounds. and moves very, very well for his size. He's got a very high motor off the ball. He's a run stuffer. You never see him give up on plays. You never see him take plays off. I think that's what a lot of teams love, and especially a team like the Packers, where they struggle immensely. They picked up Damon Harrison off of waivers, and he didn't do a ton. But now he's up. He's up for a new contract. I want to say Martravius Adams is. He's finally showing out. I would give him maybe a 1-year prove-it deal. But, if Tyler Shelvin slips between the late day 2, late day 3, early 4th-round pick, which is where I think he's going to end up, and the Packers choose to wait for a defensive lineman, or even the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, depending on what they do with their D-line situation, are they going to bring in Ndamukong Suh back? Kawan Short's a free agent. Are they going to bring in Kawan Short? Kawan Short, I think, is going to be an interesting player for teams who select the defensive lineman early, maybe not named Christian Barmore, because I think Barmore has the talent to start right away. I think Levi Usarike potentially does too, and Jay Tefel. But if you put a guy like Kawan Short on a team, and you bring in Tyler Shelvin, that to me is a good guy to learn off of a lot. And I like Tyler Shelvin. I think he has the potential to have a very, very successful career. I like him a lot as a depth piece, a rotational guy, learning behind a veteran like Kawan Short. But this guy is a high motor, never takes plays off.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I was wanting to point out too, is he's probably the most solidified defensive lineman you can get in this draft. The most solid guy, reliable, does his job, what you ask him to. And his job is obviously not to stop the pass or get in the backfield, because he had 6 total pressures, I think, in 2019. So that is not this guy's job. When it comes to Shelvin, it's all about stopping the run, earns above an 85 grade in that area ever since he was in college. So it's great, guys or teams like the Packers, we keep coming back to that, but that was the Packers' biggest weakness, was stopping the run. Unwrap Sports Network coming in here showing some love. What's up, Network? We appreciate you. But yeah, he's flexible, got a big body. So that's kind of the concern too. He's fluctuated in weight during his time at LSU. At one point, he was up to 375 pounds. Which hasn't worked since, Vincent Wilfork was over 400 pounds in the NFL. So that's my main worry with him. But, I mean, when you're that big, and you're not going to have a problem stuffing, runs every now and again. So I think he'll be a very serviceable run stopper. And that's kind of what I think teams are going to view him as, instead of, a guy that can get pressure in the backfield.
Yeah, and then you mentioned his weight concerns. I mean, this might be a guy. I don't think 362 pounds is. That's a big boy, but I don't think 362 pounds is. I think if you get to the 375 range, it definitely is an area to get concerned about. Will they make him drop to the 350 range, or just shy of 350? So I mean, I think his weight concern does definitely pose some concerns, but. He still moves. He doesn't have this elite speed, but I think he still moves very, very well for his size. But, teams might view that 362 pounds as a very, very light, minor concern that to me is very easily fixable.
Yeah, and we'll see. Obviously, when you get into the NFL, the regiments are completely different, unless you're like at Alabama, where it is run like an NFL team when you get the whole. Yeah. So that's understandable, and you've got things to be able to build off of when it comes to the NFL. In college, you're trying to make it to the NFL, so it becomes a little less. I gotta follow these rules. I can actually go and get McDonald's, but to be able to keep your job, it becomes a little bit more serious. It's I gotta keep this job. I gotta keep my weight down. Obviously, there's been players in the past that have dealt with problems like that, aka my boy KB Kelvin Benjamin, originally Carolina Panthers, and he dealt with his weight issues, and we saw that occur. So that's just something to keep an eye on with him. But we're kind of winding down here, Sam. So I'm going to end it off with one more person. That's kind of a guy we both forgot about. And it's another guy out of the Big Ten, went to Iowa, and that's a defensive lineman by the name of Davion Nixon, who came in with a lot of hype, but is not really seeing a lot of love right now heading up into the 2021 NFL draft.
I thought we were talking Jalen Twyman, but that's all right. That's all right. No, you're totally fine. But I mean, Davion Nixon, it seems like he was getting love, throughout the season, after the season, and now you're not seeing a ton from him, a lot. And This is a guy I think has a lot of athleticism, a lot of speed off the ball. Very similar to, a guy like Twyman. I was going to mention Twyman's very active with his hands. I think
Yeah, you
Twyman.
can talk about him too. I don't mind.
I'm sorry, yeah. Twyman, I like a lot too because yes, he opted out. We were excited. We praised the Pitt defense. We were excited to watch the Pitt defense. Paris Ford opts out during the season. Jalen Twyman opts out before the season, doesn't come back. So they're left with Patrick Jones the second and Rashad Weaver, who you give a shout out to during one of our weeks previewing the games or previewing the previous that week. But I mean, I think Jalen Twyman's a guy that excels as a pass rusher. He's 6'2", 290, doesn't have elite size. But I think Jalen Twyman could be a guy that teams could move out on the outside. I think you could see a little bit more versatility from Jalen Twyman at the next level. But Davian Nixon, this is a defensive lineman that really came out of nowhere and really showed out. And you start seeing him first round mocks, even to teams like the Cleveland Browns. But Davian Nixon, to me, I think I see him more definitely as an interior guy, maybe a little bit more of a nose tackle guy. But yeah, I mean, I think for his size, I like his speed a lot, and I think he's very athletic. But I like Davian Nixon. I love Jalen Twyman. I like them both.
Yeah, when it comes to David Nixon, he kind of made his name known as being a sack guy. He was able to get in that backfield, and that just shows the ability to be explosive off the ball, which showed a lot. He's got an ability and playmaking ability that you can't coach. So that bodes well in his favor. The thing that comes to mind when I'm talking about David Nixon is that consistency. He did have great grades against the likes of Northwestern and Penn State, respectively, with an 80.6 and 90.3 overall grade. And then, against the likes of Minnesota and Illinois and Wisconsin, he had grades of 44, 52, and 59, which is not going to get the job done because those, at least two of those, had pretty legitimate offensive line. Wisconsin, obviously, the best out of those three teams. Minnesota was going through kind of a reloading year on their offensive line, so they had to work through some things with that. But Illinois, they had I think almost either seniors or juniors on their offensive line that had guys that had been there for a while, and he just didn't show up in the big pressure situations when he needed to be able to cause disruptions against great offensive lines or above average offensive lines. And that's going to be worrisome when it comes to the NFL, but we'll see where that ends up. And then, moving on did I mess his name up? Guy from Pitt. What is this?
I'm sorry you correct up, but yeah, Jalen Twyman.
Twyman, excuse me. That Pitt defensive line, we knew coming into this season was going to be nasty. Unfortunately, opt-outs prevented us from being able to see the complete package that it was supposed to be. But in the year before, he was in 2019, absolutely disgusting what they were able to do on the defensive line. Works well. Not necessarily a super explosive guy, gets the job done. He's another solid defensive line prospect here. And like we're saying, all these guys have the potential. It's just about getting them in the right rhythm, in the right situation to be able to succeed. He's another one of those guys who will most likely fit better in a 4-3 compared to a 3-4, 3-3 technique type of defensive lineman. But I'm surprised that on a lot of these NFL draft analysis and draft profiles and rankings and things, that Twyman's not even on there, which is surprising to me.
He's been dropping in people's lists too. And I was going to say too, I think it's so interesting looking at people's lists. I probably said this last week. I tend to repeat myself, but I think it's so interesting to look at people's lists and even mock drafts because it's fun to compare, which players are viewed higher because Jalen Twyman was a high defensive line prospect throughout the season. And I think that opt-out potentially hurt him because we've talked about guys in this episode like Alan McNeil, Davian Nixon, guys like them just showing out when you have guys like Levi Uzarike, Jay Tafel, and Jalen Twyman opted out.
Yeah, it's pretty wild the way things and players have moved, especially on the defensive line, because it's been a shuffle from the get-go. I mean, Marvin Wilson was originally supposed to be the top guy in this class to come out, and that's not happening anymore. And so it's just crazy to see the movement that's occurred based off of whether that's opt-outs, whether that's production in the past season, and all of that nature. But we're winding down here, guys. If you guys have been watching the show, obviously you've seen the ticker go down to the bottom, RX Hemp. teespring.com's on there. Get 10% off every purchase with code RXHemp-USN. Head over to our Teespring shop, teespring.com/stores/unwrapped. Get all of your favorite shows merchandise as well as the unwrapped merchandise as well. Mybookie.ag, use code USN100 for double your first deposit. Minimum $45, max of $1,000. So you get double your free play. It's awesome, guys. It's amazing stuff. And then last but not least, guys, head over to our Patreon page. Go to Patreon, type in Unwrapped Sports. You are supporting not only our show, you're supporting everybody else in our show. You're supporting the network. Not only that, but you get to interact with the contributors, with the directors of Unwrapped. If you join the $5 and $10 level clubs as well in our Discord. So it's awesome stuff, exclusive content in there as well, especially when it comes to gambling. You know, Corey's got his gambling picks in there as well. If you join that $10 one, you get entered into a $10 Amazon giveaway. So a gift card to Amazon for $10, which is awesome. And then at that $10 level, you also get entered into a signed memorabilia giveaway. So this past month in February, it was a Keenan Allen signed jersey. This month, it is a David Montgomery signed jersey. So obviously, David Montgomery there, one of the running backs for the Bears. It's awesome stuff we got going on. You got great odds to win. I think last month, Amber Vickers, one of our own contributors, ended up winning that Keenan Allen jersey. We're trying to get more people in here, just show the love to all the fans. I mean, $10 and you're entered into a giveaway for a signed NFL jersey. That makes it all worth it to me. And then at the $5 level, you obviously are also added to the Discord. And then you also get added into the giveaway for the $10 Amazon gift card as well. And then at both of those levels, you also receive a discount to our store. So that makes it worth it too for any of the merch that you want to buy from the Unwrapped Sports Network. Again, my name is Caleb Skinner. You can follow me at Twitter at CHSNoll. And I'll go ahead and toss it over to you, Sam, and let you end off the show with any plugs that you would like to have.
Yeah, I mean, you said at the beginning, Sam_Daring68. We are no longer Dairy Sports. We decided to make a little rebrand into strictly football. And what better way to kick off the rebrand to have our good old friend Isaiah Loudermilk. Podcast is published. Go check out Priority Sports. His agency definitely retweeted that as well, or shared that out. So go give that a listen. It was such an awesome interview. You'll get to learn more about him. Both on and off the field, his recruiting process, and his time at Wisconsin, what he's been doing to prepare for the draft. He's out in California. Granted, it's been 50, 60 degrees the past 2-3 days here in Wisconsin, but the time when we interviewed him last week, we're sitting in a 20, 30, 40 degree weather. He's out in California living the dream, and in 70, 80 degree weather. It's awesome. But yeah, definitely go give that a shout out. Go follow the Blitz. And yeah.
Well, that's going to do it, guys. Sam, as always, I appreciate you, joining me every single Wednesday night here on Saturday Standouts at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Central Time over there with Sam. It's awesome stuff we got coming up. We're going to be diving into the edge rushers this next episode. So you guys keep an eye out on that. And with that being said, guys, this has been another episode of Saturday Standouts.